All right, so 31. This one asked about rate of non-response, which is not something we talked about, but surely you figured out that that's the percent of people that didn't respond. I was going to say that yesterday. I didn't even think y'all would have an issue with it. So if 45,956 of them were called and 5,029 were completed, how would I figure out how many weren't completed? Subtract and then divide by. It ends up being like 81. Of course, it would help to have that open.
I got 89.06%.
Oh, 89.06%. I was thinking 80.1. 89.06%. That is the rate of non-response for this problem. So now in this one, they're calling them and asking them about how far away they drive. So this is like the concept of making sure you understand pieces here. The people who answer, you have to think about that relative to what you're asking. People who are home when you answer, overall, compared to everybody else, what do you think about their distance they drive from home? So people who are home more, overall, should probably drive less, right? Because if they're driving the whole time, then you can't call them. So it's going to lead to bias because of that. But I also want to see like a direction here. So if we're talking about in terms of non-response, so the rate of non-response for this one was, not in terms of non-response. The number that we get for distance they drive from home would probably be what than the actual number because of what we just said about people who drive. It's going to be what? It's going to be underestimated. So this is an underestimate because the people we got would have smaller values than the overall. So you would write that as underestimate. 32, this is where they're talking about ring no answer. To be honest, this is one of those where some of you at this point in time are going to be like, wow, I really had to think outside of context for this problem. I had no idea that's what I was supposed to do. This is kind of one of those that it kind of gets you into where you're supposed to start thinking for our class. So they call it different times. Our two different time periods to call are January to Easter versus July to August. All of the calls were made between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. And then we talked about the percentages. Which time period do you think had a higher rate of no answers? So which one do you think had a higher chance of not answering? January to Easter or July to August 31st? Why? Right. So in January to Easter, it's colder. It's darker at 7 to 10. So people are going to be home more often as opposed to the middle of summer where it's nicer and it's lighter and people are traveling. So you would expect more no answers to be there during the July time period as opposed to the January time period. Now, there's nothing to say that you didn't come up with the exact opposite answer and you had a good justification to it, and that is absolutely fine. But that is probably my most typical answer is the fact that like it's cold, it's dark, people are at home, as opposed to the other one. Questions with that? All right, just because you didn't do the homework doesn't mean you're going to sit there on your phone while I'm going over it. I'm going over all of it on the board. So a study in Texas looked at seatbelt choices used by drivers. So people came in and they asked them what their opinions were on seatbelts, but they had actually watched them when they walked in to see if they were wearing a seatbelt before they got there. 75% claimed that they always use seatbelts, but 61.5% actually were wearing seatbelts when they got there. So there was bias here. The bias was overestimate because the 75% was higher than the 61.5%. What is the vocab word? So kind of thinking ahead to this is like what your quiz is going to be. This is response bias that is occurring here, which is a response bias. I usually say is just what? Lying. So why are they choosing to lie here?
Because the person who's asking the question.
the law to wear the seatbelt. It's a socially acceptable thing. Like, they should be wearing it, so they're going to say they do, even though maybe they don't. So do you expect bias to always be in the same direction for this specific survey? Yes. So, like, sometimes it's going to be higher or lower by chance, but do you expect this one to always be that direction? Yes, because people are going to say they're wearing it more often than they actually are. 35. So each one of these, we want to know if the question is clear or if it's slanted in a certain direction. Some cell phone users have developed brain cancer. Should all cell phones come with a warning label explaining the danger of the use of cell phones? Is the question there clear? The question itself is clear. Now, is it slanted towards the desired response?
Yes.
And why?
Order.
It explains like a justification for like.
So that first sentence essentially, what would be our best? Well, actually, these are all wording bias. So this is they just like lead with something that kind of says, hey, this is something about it.
Yeah.
Now let me ask my question. Had they taken that out of there, it probably would have been fine. So B, do you agree that a national system of health insurance should be favored because it would provide health insurance for everyone and would reduce administrative costs? Is that one clear?
Not really. Not as much as the other one.
Not as much as the other one, right. Now, do you still understand the question that's being asked?
Yes.
I would probably say yes. They kind of throw it all in there to, maybe I would still say it's clear. Is it slanted towards a desired response?
Yes.
Yes, because they say because it has good things, and that's all they list, obviously. And then C, in view of escalating environmental degradation and incipient resource depletion, would you favor economic incentives for recycling of resource-intensive consumer goods? Is that one clear?
No.
I got lost reading it, to be honest. Now, that might be one. That's probably not one that I would like give you on a quiz and ask you something super straightforward about it. I would give you more context. That one, where are they asking this question? Who are they asking it to? General public, that's too high. Like, that's too high of a level. There's too much vocab in there that's not common everyday vocab. It makes it unclear. Is that one slanted towards a desired response?
Yeah.
Because of which part?
The beginning pretty much.
The initial part, in view of the fact that it's whatever depleting. So it also leads a direction there. And all of those were specifically wording bias, kind of led with or followed with one. All right, so this one, web portal AOL, it used to be one, probably isn't one anymore, places opinion poll questions next to many of its news stories. So what kind of sample is that? Voluntary response. And now that's one thing I should have made a bigger point about yesterday. Don't just call it voluntary, because voluntary just means you volunteer, but it is specifically a voluntary response. So if you mean voluntary response, use both words together. Which means, is that a good way to do this?
No.
And what did we say yesterday? That voluntary response samples get what kind of results? Extremes. Doesn't mean it's... So this could be one like the question I asked earlier, say, will it always go in that direction? Maybe not, because voluntary response is extremes. It's, in certain settings, you might get one extreme. In certain settings, you might get the other. What is our answer here? We just talked about it. I just didn't say it. So it's C. It uses voluntary response. So the results will tell us a little about the population of adults, because it only gives us the extremes, not all of the adults. Archaeologists plan to examine a sample of 2 meter square plots. People start to read this one and stop and pick an answer choice. They choose separate random samples of. So we've got them grouped here. But what do we do with each one of those? Take some from each. And some people who scan it really quick look like it just says we're just taking entire ones or whatever. So because we're separating them and then taking some from each, it is stratified. So it should be D. And again, those groups that we split by are similar. We're taking some from each of the similar groups to ensure that we get a representative of the population. This one was about as straightforward as you get. When we take a census, we attempt to collect data from everyone and everyone in the population, not just the sample. So be C. An example of non-sampling error that would reduce the accuracy of sample survey. This is your issue for this one, which means it has nothing to do with obtaining the sample. Is A an issue? Yes, but is it how we obtain the sample?
Or yes, it is.
Yes, which means no, it's not sampling error. Using the telephone directory as the sampling frame. Is that how we obtained our sample? Yes. What is that word? Vocab word for that one?
Convenience.
I would say under coverage more because why?
Because
Only using people in the telephones and only using people that are listed, have listed number of telephones. But that's again a sampling error. Interviewing people at shopping malls to obtain a sample. Is that a sampling issue?
Yeah.
Yes. What is that one?
only people at shop.
So I'd probably say what word again? I'd probably say under coverage again. That one could be convenience also. Even I would say that one convenience more so than B, but I would still say under coverage better. So D, variation due to chance in choosing a sample at random. Is there going to be variation due to chance in choosing a sample at random?
Yeah.
Yes. Is that an error that could reduce the accuracy of the sample? That's just something that's going to happen. So it is true that that's going to happen, but that is not what it's asking about up here. That is not a non-sampling error. Inability to contact members of the sample is your correct answer. What word is that? Non-response. Even though they have been called, they didn't answer. They didn't just say, no, I'm not going to respond to it. It is still
that's
non-response.
not how they take the sample.
This is not how they take the sample.
Okay.
I wrote your name down. I wrote down a good group of numbers down. You then chose not to answer, but how I made that sample was still good.
Okay.
And then the last one, a simple random sample of 1,200 adult Americans is selected. Each person is asked the following question. In light of the huge national deficit, should the government at this time spend additional money to establish a national system of health insurance? In light of the huge national deficit, I'm leading with that, so I am definitely swaying a direction here. I want to talk about this one because it goes kind of back and forth in this one. I don't even remember if I talked about the answer in my last talk, actually. So I am trying to sway them to answer what?
That they should not support it.
Okay, so I'm trying to sway them to say no. We can agree with that, right? But then this says only 39% of those responding answered yes. So if I'm making them say no or encouraging them to say no, but it's asking me about yes, is this higher or lower than I would expect the actual population answer to be?
Lower.
And do you see how they went? This one's going to go higher, which makes this one lower. So this is underestimate. If I had asked that question specifically. What's our writing? I don't even think I talked about this one. So probably understates or underestimate the percent of people who favor a system of national health insurance. Questions on that one?
I was thinking they only took 1,200 people out of the entire U.S. population. Isn't that a very small amount to take accurate data for?
But if they did a good job of how they obtained it, then it would still be okay.
Okay.
And we get more into that as the class goes about when it makes sense. Now, if this question had instead said 61% of those responding answered no, would that still be underestimate?
It would still underestimate the people who would favor.
So if it instead said, okay, so then it would say people who don't favor it. Yes, if I don't look at these answer choices and just say 61% said no, is 61% an over or underestimate? Then it would be overestimate. So it matters what question I'm asking at the end. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions about homework stuff?